I think I might be live. Sorry about that pause there. Also, I've increased the... That is a bit loud, isn't it? Let me just... How is the volume of that? I'm a bit louder than I normally am. I might drop my volume back down again to the number 88, which is where Nova told me to put it. There we go. I think that's back to my usual levels. How's that? Is that all right? I know I'm often a little bit quiet, but I think that's back to the normal levels. We could cut all this out for the audio-only people who are also late on the previous episode. Sorry. It's been a week. What a roller coaster week it ended up being, and it's only Tuesday. Oh, no, it's Wednesday. Great. Anyway, in a slight change to what I thought I might do today, I thought I was going to do news because there's a huge pile of news, but I'm not going to be able to do it justice today because I ended up having much less time than I wanted to. So I thought, you know what, let's do something different. Let's do a page turn. Let's go back through some of the things I've scooped up that I wanted to talk about from last year. And one of them was Transport Scotland's Islands Connectivity Plan. Now, it's not hugely detailed, and it's more of a stepping off point for us to maybe just generally talk about some things. One of the things I will need to do actually is let's get Open Railway Map is the right tool to use to look at the islands, Scottish islands. There we go. Let's see if there's images. Let's see if there's a nice picture of many better, but I probably won't be able to find that either. Let's actually use OpenStreetMap to have a mapping tool. Oh no, we can't because OpenStreetMap have applied that stupid dark mode. OpenStreetMap, why have you applied this stupid dark mode and made everything dark? So OpenStreetMap's now unusable. Great work, OpenStreetMap. So Open Railway Map it is. Good, fine. Let's whiz that over here and F11 that for the future. We'll need this because we have to talk about this place, which is the wonderful country of Scotland. Anyway, I digress horribly. I also want to... Where have you gone? Oh, you're back. Here, good. Marvellous. Right. Enough of all that. Oh no, not enough of all that because I want to talk about the COVID stats. We haven't done this for... No, I don't want to print the webpage. Come back here. Let's talk about the COVID statistics because this is the overall trace from the start of the COVID-19 calamity through to, now-ish, March 2025. Obviously, there's a bit of data fun going on with this drop here. But if you kind of ignore the drop and kind of cut from this point, you can see that rail this is a rolling average, rail bouncing around at the 100% mark. Interestingly, above where road was/is with some reasonable consistency, intertwining with road, which I find very interesting. I am very pleased about the sort of the fact that the fact that we're intertwining with road is more broadly indicative of overall mobility because it's as a share of overall mobility. If road is dropping again, then there are other macro factors that are influencing rail. So that's interesting. And similarly, the fact that we had this big drop in road is indicating not that rail is failing here, not that there is an issue with rail, but that there was a macro effect of some kind at in that winter period that led to... I do need to put some verticals on. Yes, everyone, you're right. But there's a macro effect here that is why we have had that's impacted all forms of mobility. I'm still fascinated by this bus gap here. Very interested to know what's caused that. But the numbers will press on, and I'll continue to look at this. And at some point, a statistician will jump out. Hello Hannah in the chat. By the way, hello everyone in the chat. Michael C and others, Pythagorean, other friends, Mr. Guy Snails, Ann Person. Who else is there? Uncritical Simon. Lots of familiar faces in the chat. Hello everyone. Hannah, yes, we do have to. I know I always have conversations on the boil that I'm always halfway through and never conclude. It's because I'm an idiot. That's a really important thing to grasp. In fact, Anna, as a now regular viewer, you'll know that I'm an idiot, so that you'll know the deal. But yeah, I know I owe a few people some continued conversations of fun things and so on and so on. So don't let me forget, and never be afraid. Anyone who's out there who's emailing me and has queries of me, never be afraid to pester me and say, oh, by the way, can I ping you? People will also be pleased to know, while we're on this subject, in fact, let's go big face briefly. Hello everyone. Oh, my hair's looking a bit preppy, isn't it? While we're going big face briefly and being candid, one of the prizes has found its way to its owner. I've realised the easiest way for me to get them to you will be for me to travel to you and give it to you in person. So I'm going to I'm going to work my way through all of the and I'll use it for an excuse for travelling, and I'll give you all these gifts that are still... Oh, they're down here actually now, but all the gifts that I've been given to you, that I need to give to you, I will come find you and give them to you. Anyway, so let's go to my face again and say islands, ferries. We're going to talk about them. Here's a few of them, all piled up in a little heap here, being maintained and scrubbed and such and such and such. And there's some more over there as well. Because we need to talk about these and the plans for them. And God, I love traveling on them. I adore taking the ferry out of Oban. It's always a delight. This isn't Oban, by the way. But when I am traveling, often getting the train up to Oban and then getting the ferry over with a bicycle to do things, it's always a joy and a delight, and I love doing it. One of my favourite things I've done of late was cycling up through the Isles. Getting the ferry over to the south of Uist, and then working my way right the way up to through the Isle, the Hebrides, and then getting the ferry back, and then cycling indeed back from Ullapool down to Inverness, and then getting the train. That was just honestly an absolute delight of a trip, and it was lovely. And ferries were a major part of that. Getting to islands is important. It's not just important for leisure people, tourists, but it's also lots of people's livelihoods. And if we want to, there's a balance to be struck here, and I think an interesting, if challenging conversation of, if we want. The reality is that land needs stewards of some kind, people to look after the land, and that means you have to have some form of economy and some form of society and civilizational presence in these islands. To do that, you need to have mobility. You need to facilitate mobility. I don't think just us completely draining all of human life out of the extremities of Scotland is actually the right thing to do, even if cities are the most efficient, cities and urban areas are the most efficient way for humans to live. It doesn't mean abandoning rural areas, but managing those rural areas and allowing people, particularly families and young people, to keep so that you don't just have an aging population in these areas. So you have a vibrant population in these areas. People need to be able to move around, and they need to be able to do that sustainably. And also without an undue, disproportionate carbon footprint. The advantage of decarbonising is that all of a sudden you take that equation out, albeit you have to think about the material impacts as well. But there's been some challenges in Scotland recently with decarbonisation plans and ferries. That's gone somewhat awry in stories that I'm not going to try and recapitulate here, because there's a lot of detail to pick through on that front. But it's been messy in Scotland, frankly, and so that's changed some of the thinking about Isles connectivity, and I think that's reflected a little bit in this report. Michael C. Absolutely. People do like living in rural areas. We shouldn't forcefully be depopulating them. Absolutely. I think there's value in encouraging people to densify where they can, and I include rural areas within that. So if the benefit of growing a central town versus having lots of tiny spread out little hamlets everywhere, there are benefits to thinking about that sort of thing. And frankly, as a species, we do have to tackle that head on a little bit. But for the most part, it doesn't matter too much, because if you've got super low density, then the emissions of all these communities is generally pretty low. And we're not talking about, by the fact that they are small communities, their carbon footprint is pretty low. And if you can satisfy their mobility needs sustainably, then you can lower that further. Again, when you have these rural areas travel, when you have longer distances, as people living in rural areas have, their carbon footprint, the great percentage of it will be the travel, and it'll be the fact they're traveling around in a car. And how we deal with that is really important. And then throw into the mix people who live on islands, then you've got the additional challenge of not just the impact of them travelling on the ferry when they travel on it and the percentage carbon of that, but also the fact that those ferries have to run consistently, reliably, and so it's actually the population that uses the ferry divided by the total run time of the ferry and the carbon emissions associated. So it gets complicated the way we think about carbon impacts of travel. It gets complex. And so, with all of that said, there's something really charming about a relatively dense small town in rural areas. My grandparents live in a village near Stowmarket. Both places are lovely to spend time in. Hebrides underwater train tunnel, says Nucker. Well, the answer to that is not no, actually. And I look forward to us thinking a bit about that maybe towards the back end of this episode as a little bit of a tease for next week's episode. In any case, let's do this. Let's talk about the report. And the report, it's going to be a nice discursive one, I think. There's not a huge amount in the report for us to pee through. It's fairly thin gruel because it's like early strategy. It's not like this is going to be the plan. It's like, what kind of stuff should we be thinking about? But it's a chance for us to do some of that thinking, I think, which is nice. A chance for us to just talk about something a bit different on rail, actually, because we don't talk about rural connectivity much. It's not because I don't think it's important, but it's less critical for us to worry about in terms of carbon, certainly. People can travel around in their cars in small numbers, and yes, as I say, your individual emissions are quite a bit higher than people who live in cities, but the absolute emissions for rural areas are generally lower because of the much smaller populations involved. I care more about mobility and satisfying mobility needs in rural areas, less from a carbon-based sustainability perspective, and more from a loneliness, social health, social well-being, and distribution of services and quality of life angle of sustainability in rural areas. And that is important. That is something I care a lot about, having kind of grown up in rural areas. That is something I deeply care about. So anyway, without all this waffling, let's crack on, shall we? Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, and I realise that I did have that slider too low, so it's a little bit quiet there. Sorry. Yeah, Michael C., you're spot on. The intro music was a bit quieter than usual. Good. It's because I've been playing with my levels. I was recording an episode of We're Not So Different podcast, and it involved me wibbling my levels around. Dr. Eleanor Yanniga was giggling with delight at the fact that she'd finally forced me into changing my setup, having had Nova wobbling around with the... Basically, Nova told me not to set it to one place and leave it there because it was perfect for past recordings of W2IP. 69 concurrent viewers, nice. Uncritical Simon, no, Michael C is spot on to tell me about things being quieter than usual because it's important that we have reasonable consistency on these things, particularly for the audio-only folks. Anyway, Scotland's railways. That's one part of... We've talked a reasonable amount about Scotland's railways. We've done a past episode on what the network should look like, and you better believe we're going to be doing another one. And a lot of that focuses rightly. This is a bit of a continuation of what I was saying before. I'm glad you're liking that I'm speaking your language, Hannah. English. It's right that we focus a good, strong amount of attention on the Central Belt because that's where the majority of people live. That's where the majority of nasty sustainability outcomes are focused, whether that's mass poverty or emissions, pollution, environmental damage. But that doesn't mean we have to ignore everywhere else, as previously discussed. And whilst carbon emissions are less of a critical issue in the rural areas, in absolute terms, if not in relative terms, they are, as we've said, loneliness, access to public services, access to education, access to work opportunities are all much more challenging to deliver sustainably in rural areas. And that doesn't mean we should be ignoring it. It means that we should be paying close attention to how we deliver that in those areas. And that doesn't just mean on the transport side, it does mean from the planning side of things, the shaping of our communities, the shaping of our towns and villages in rural areas and what they look like. But yeah, things like health, education and work are very challenging, and other public services are very challenging to deliver in rural areas, and even more so in islands, which is why we're going to be talking about we're going to have a flick through this. I think it's like 30, 40 pages, and it's not huge. The Islands Connectivity Plan Strategic Approach. This is a draft of their approach to the plan. This is a very early document, but I just want to cover this because it sparks some thoughts. It's something we don't often talk about. It sparks some thoughts, and I want to think about this. Actually, you know what would be really nice? I haven't pulled up is a Scotland ferry map. Let's see if we can get one of these up. Images. There is one on... Okay, interesting. There is one on Wikipedia. Is this going to be any good? Oh, you know what? That's not bad. Let's steal that and pop it into my PowerPoint presentation because I think that'll be useful. Let's pop that there. There we are, Scotland. Oh, come on, you wee dancer. Just drop it in. Ah, it's incredible how much Google Chrome has ruined dragging and dropping images, because I don't even know why. I'm gonna have to save this image into a folder. This is the content you're here for, folks. Is me describing myself creating the episode. Download started. There you go. So you can see that I've done that now. If I do that's up there. You can see this happening in real time. But I want to have a picture of I want us to have a picture of the ferries, because that will make our lives a little bit easier. For those, because lots of people watching this may not know of all the different ferries about. So let me. You know what? I'm gonna do this now. So we're gonna go through this document in a bit, but before we do that, let's just talk about how talk about these islands and how they all link up and join to each other and such and such and so on. So we've got this. It's interesting. Yeah. So we've got. I'm not going to ignore them, but they've kind of fairly well self-contained. We have the kind of the non-CalMac routes. So the non-CalMac routes include the Orkney and the Shetland connections. They also include the connections between Ireland and the north of Ireland and Scotland via either no longer Stranraer, actually north of Stranraer and Troon. There's also the Dunoon Guruk ferry, which is an independent, but all the others are CalMac, Caledonia McBrain ferries, and these include the ferries over to so you've got the ferries in the north, so out to the Hebrides, the Outer Hebrides here, so up to Lewis, Harris, Uist, all these islands down here, so that you've got the Stornoway ferry across to Ullapool. Actually, me having my red there is not hugely helpful. You've got the Stornoway Ullapool ferries. You've got the Egg to Tarbert and to Lochmaddy ferries. You've got the ferries that link Uist and Harris between Bermeray and Leverborough. And you've got the kind of the Barra to Loch Boisdale ferry, the kind of the connecting ferries that go up to Loch Boisdale from Mallaig and from Oban, and then Castle Bay, likewise to Oban, and then down to Colin Tyree. And then you've got a huge, massive little ferries that connect up to Mull. There's the Tobermory to Kilhoan. There's the Loch Allen to Craignure. There's Oban to Craignure. There's the Lismore ferry. There's Oban to Colonsay. Then there's see what I'm saying. Isla Jura have the connections across to Clyde. Sorry, to the Mull of Kintyre, and then you've got the Bute ferry and the ferry that goes down to Campbellton as well. That skips the long journey by road you have to do Mull of Kintyre. Many ferries, many ferries. Ferries left, right, and centre. So, there we go. Don't forget to at me in the chat if there's a thing you want me to spot, because there's some hearty and pleasing chat going on here. So, people are saying move ferries away from car carrying. Yeah, well, this is it. We've got to think about whether that's viable or not, and is it not? So, that's the. There is a discontinued international ferry that no longer runs from Rosyth to Bruges or to Zeebrugge. And then there's proposals, they often pop up but seem to disappear again, of a Kirkcaldy Leith connection that is, this one might materialise actually, but I'm not so sure. I don't know, who knows. Anyway, so ferries galore. So the majority of the ferries sit on the west coast. They sit on the fjord-like Atlantic coast of Scotland, connecting up to all the islands on that wonderful bit of coastline. This is just, from all these red lines cover some of the most spectacular bits of scenery that you'll see in your life. It's just a wonderful part of the world. Extremely beautiful, extremely rough, rugged, and wonderful. And it's going to be fun to talk a little bit about it. I've also got, for the sake of usefulness, I've got Open Railway Map down here, which is funny because it's ignoring. There we go. There's the railway starting to appear, which is nice. So there we go. So there's some railways showing up, which is fun. Good to have a look at some of the wonderful railways that once existed up this part of the world. There we are. It never connected through. It went to Ballachulish, and that was the end of that, and so not hugely useful. If it had connected up to Fort William, I dare say we might not have got rid of it after all. But there we go. As it happens, the line down from up from Connell Ferry to Ballachulish not hugely useful to be retained, even though it's a bit of a local lifeline. But there we go. That's another story. Here's wonderful Oban. We talked about epic fireworks displays popping off on W2IP recently. So Scotland, there it is with its many islands, thousands of islands. Let us talk about this plan. Let's get through it. So, it's a classic page turn. Let's have a look, shall we? Happy memories from my ferry trip from Oban. Yeah, it's a lovely trip. In fact, you can do a combined trip you can get the combination that takes you from Oban to Mull, over to Craigniur. Then you drive up from Craigniur to the other side of the island, and you can go across and have a look at Iona, which is very interesting from a historical perspective. And then you can get the ferry, the wee boat that takes you out to Staffa, which is truly terrific. It really is wonderful. Dorhango 93. I like there are many ferries. That's good for mobility, unlike Hawaii, where the only way to travel between islands is by airline. Meanwhile, tiny islands in Scotland can have all this service. Yes, exactly. Iona, very fascinating. It's a very impressive abbey nooker. You're right. So, let's have a look. The usual, there's a forward, there's a bit of discussion about the plan, ferries, challenges and opportunities, there's some stuff about themes. We're going to skip the forward because, whatever. So we're going to skip the forward and we're just going to get stuck in. So, scope and purpose. The purpose of the ICP, we're going to call it the ICP, right? So the Islands Connectivity Plan is to set out how ferry services supported by other transport modes will be delivered and strengthened, working towards a long-term vision, whatever that is, and supported by clear priorities and defined outcomes for people and places. Fine. The ICP will build on the ferries plan, which ran up to 2022. This little funny figure down here, PowerPoint slide, it's been copy and pasted in here, sets out the structure of the ICP that is informed by current Scottish Government and Transport Scotland policies set out in various plans and other interrelated things, including the second Strategic Transport Project Review, which was the proposal for Scotland to do stuff, and which I have to say was woefully lacking in its ambition for Scotland's railways, among other things. So the current thing is you've got the National Islands Plan, and that's then feeding into the development of the ICP, which will replace the ferries plan, the community needs assessments and fares policy. So, and then that will then run into the consisting of the strategic approach, the vessels and ports plan. So understanding what the different ports and vessels will be needed to continue that. The community needs assessments, fare policy, low carbon policy, and onward and connecting travel. So it's very much oriented around what we're doing with the ferries, folks. So, okay, fine. This strategic approach paper is one part of the Islands Connectivity Plan and proposes our overall strategic approach to island transport connectivity, including ferries, aviation, fixed links, and especially addressing the strategic challenges facing CHFS and NIFS services. Let me just tell you what those are, because CHFS is Clyde and Hebrides ferry services, and NIFS is Northern Isles ferry services. Okay, yeah, fine. Northern Isles are working in Shetland, so that's they're working in Shetland. Okay, fine. And Clyde and Hebrides, I take it, is everything else. So that's the two tranches of stuff. Yeah, okay. So the Clyde Hebrides services are all of the red stuff, basically, that we were looking at, and the Northern Isles ferry services is Orkney and Shetland. That's how they're categorising them. Okay, fine, noted. There we go. So let's keep going with this then. So it can be applied to all domestic ferry services while respecting the autonomy of local authorities to develop their own standards and their accountability to local electorates for the design and delivery of ferry services for which they are responsible. Because there are some that are local council, like Highlands and Islands Council delivers some themselves. Actually, it's the Corran ferry at Highlands and Islands one. I think it might be, isn't it? It's rather than a Calmac. There are a couple like that. There are a couple of little ones. Corran ferry, a very, very, very useful little ferry link. If you're particularly on a bicycle, yeah, it's Highland Council. And they're just calling it Highlands Council now rather than Highlands and Islands. It shows what I know. Anyway, yes, that is the Corran Ferry. The Corran Ferry, where is it? You can book in, have a look. There it is. There's the camera showing what's going on. Looks a bit snowy, is what I'm going to say about that. Funding announced for new Corran Ferry. Oh, lovely. There we go. So, an example of a locally administered ferry. So, fine. The ICP includes a series of delivery plans being developed in parallel to ensure that there's coherence between them. So, that's the other stuff we talked about. So that last year they were working on other bits and pieces. So the refresh needs assessments for the Clyde Hebrides and Northern Isles ferry services, ferry fares, fine, okay. Island transport connectivity. It is at its simplest the safe, reliable, and efficient movement of people, goods, and services to support sustainable communities and populations. This island's connectivity plan seeks to address existing challenges, in particular the reliability and resilience of ferry services. This will come up as the... Oh, wait a minute. Let me make my face appear, by the way. Let's make my little face appear in the corner. Small face. Hello, it's me. So there's a particular point on reliability that will come up that's quite interesting. Yeah, we'll get to that. Future is predicted to see poorer weather and an increased number of severe weather events. This will mean an increased risk of disruption to transport networks everywhere, including to, from, and on islands. Vessel and port design can seek to mitigate these impacts, but will never remove them entirely. Yeah, absolutely. This is climate resilience stuff, key. Therefore, resilience planning for island communities will be essential going forward, as will service planning by transport operators to include the restoration of essential services supplies, whether by air or sea or fixed links. So, the National Islands Plan was published in 2019. It set out 13 strategic objectives, including the stuff to do with improved outcomes in terms of housing, health, education, environment, climate change, and energy. Fine. It's going through its first review. There might be a new plan as it's reviewed. Fine. The level of future island transport demand will depend on several factors. In particular, it will be impacted by future development planning and by the availability of goods and services in islands. Sustainable island communities will be able to access more goods and services such as healthcare without the need for personal travel to and from the mainland, and in some cases other islands. That's good. It makes sense to localize the delivery of these. That's a benefit to justifying. People who are providing those services are often younger families or younger people who might have families, or just generally younger people delivering those services. So you have the opportunity to. Particularly with health, where you can road, and education generally, certainly with health, where you can rota people in. Education is a little trickier, but you can circulate people through these places, and therefore bring the average age down for some of these communities, and ensure that you have some vibrance, because those people stay there if they're like, we like living here. Their children go to school, they'll use health services, and you get a virtuous circle of these communities will sustain rather than dying out. Because the idea of them dying out isn't good, actually, for all sorts of reasons, including culture. It's a lost culture. Ireland's life is unique. The life on the Scottish Isles is unique, and losing that, we should be fighting to retain that culture. I think a lot about canal boat culture and life on canal boats, and how much that was an enormous part of British culture that has been almost entirely lost. Held only in a few museums, living museums, and even there, barely retained. So I think a lot about lost living cultures, and we nearly did it with the Welsh language. Gaelic has fought hard for that to be retained to some extent, but it's important to retain livelihoods and cultures. Waverley Wanderer is wondering, does it identify any unsustainable communities? We'd be better for that. I doubt it, but we'll have a look through. So let's see. Obviously, there's improved digital connectivity, which is genuinely important. This applies to work, education, training. Yeah, being able to work remotely is genuinely a good thing in the Isles. There's value to the fact that people can live and work in the islands without having to travel as much. That is helpful. This would see a successful island generating less demand for travel off island rather than more. Correct. However, growing island economies may require adapting transport connectivity to the particular economic growth sectors on each island. Fine. How people travel also change. Yep. In particular, the implementation of the ICP will aim to improve opportunities for people to travel to and from islands without their own vehicle. This is good. This could be through public transport, active travel or car clubs, or other forms of car sharing. In anticipation of the rise of mobility as a service, Where's my sound deck? Oh, the sound deck takes about 5 minutes to load up, but wah, wah, wah. I hate that stupid phrase. There is no rise in mobility as a service. It doesn't exist. It's a gimmick for term that just describes just regular ass integrated transport. Like, come on, grow up. Across the transport system, as well as the delivery of the government's commitment to reduce car kilometres by 20%. Okay, yeah, good stuff. So it's thinking about that. This means that more people will be able to travel on the existing public transport services without the need to increase vehicle deck capacity. Good. Bring economic, social, and environmental benefits to islands and reducing public spending on ferries. While many people will choose to continue to use their own car, transport connectivity will be available to all, including those without access to a car, those who prefer to travel without one. Absolutely. Good. Two, right. We need, what do we need? Oh, yeah, we need this. That was extremely loud, more loud than I expected it to be. I will be quite honest with you, but that's fine. Anyway, that was that sad horn was for the mobility as a service rather than anything we've just talked about. So fine. There's a discussion about aviation here and potential to play an increased role, offering rapid personal travel and good onward connectivity to the rest of Scotland and also to the rest of the world. Okay. Can provide lower carbon travel when new technologies and fuels are certified for use on scheduled flights. This is an example where these might actually function and work and exist. Island hopping little aircraft are something that you can decarbonize. Airliners, no, never. But island hoppers, potentially. In the long term, additional fixed links could offer a high level of transport connectivity, albeit at substantial upfront cost. Yeah. There could also be opportunities for more freight ferries or freight-only services and passenger-only ferries alongside vehicle ferries, providing alternative services which better reflect the transport needs. Okay, fine. This is all pretty waffly, to be honest. They're not pinning anything down. Be interesting. We want to kind of see what people are saying. Ferry services, right? Let's have a look through. Ferries. Some local authorities and private operators are responsible for their own ferry services and encouraged to adopt the vision and priorities when finalising an example of our shared desire for ferry services across Scotland. Priorities are based on listening to communities that use the services as well as the views of the ferry operators and other stakeholders. Crucially, we were told by ferry-dependent communities that of these issues, reliability and resilience of ferry services matters most. Yeah, you can understand why. To achieve this, our draft vessels and ports plan focuses on improving technical and weather reliability by modernising the CMAL fleets, that's the Caledonian McBrain fleet, and building the resilience of the network by increasing standardisation of vessels and ports. A laudable aim. Good stuff. Fine. Substantial modernisation of the fleet and accompanying port upgrades will improve reliability and resilience, giving our ferry-dependent communities... Yeah, that's fine, except that it's been a bit of a procurement shambles. The vision and priorities for ferries below are as a result... Okay, so it's going to go through the vision and priorities. Let's go through. So, reliable and resilient is priority one. That's priority one, reliable and resilient ferry service that meets the needs of communities and businesses. Yep, fine. Priority two, accessible. Ferry services that are accessible and provide easy-to-use and affordable transport connectivity for all users. Absolutely. Priority three, integrated. Ferry services that enable sustainable and active travel choices which support our health and well-being and make our island... Okay, basically integrating with other transport. And priority four... low carbon. Yep, fine. So that makes some sense, I think. Let's see. Uncritical assignment. Sorry to repeat myself, but do we really need the 90-second Westray to Papa Westray flight? No. Trainworms is at a local Indian eatery. Trainworms, if you're enjoying an Indian... I haven't been to an Indian restaurant for a while. In fact, the last time I was up, I think it was for Rail Live last year when I was on my own. It was okay, not terrific. Curry's not nearly as good as in York, down in Stratford area. The naan's good, apparently. Trainworms, I'm very glad. But focus on your Indian. You can catch this up later. So there's a series of things here describing the community needs assessments. This is going through and explaining how they understand what's needed for each community. Stantec did this. Okay, fine. A little consultancy, Stantec. They're not that little. They're quite large. Fine. So there'll be publication about each of these going on and data being analysed and so on and so on. This has been... Well, it should have been commissioned already now. Given that we're in 2025. Sorry for yawning. let's see. The costs of providing ferry services are high and rising. This is creating an affordability challenge for both the Scottish Government and local authorities. We're in a period of sustained financial challenge. To be fair, unlike the UK, for Scotland that is true, because Scotland does not have its own sovereign currency and therefore cannot borrow against itself. So it is true that Scotland is limited. It does have financial challenges in a way that the UK does not. But also it's spending billions of quid on upgrading the A9 to dual carriageway. So yes and no, frankly. It'll be unsustainable to continue to increase funding of ferry services at the same rate as has been done in recent years. The successful implementation of this at the ICP can only be achieved by establishing a secure and sustainable long-term financial foundation for ferry networks. I mean, that is kind of fair enough. You know, the advantage of in theory, the advantage of low carbon tech or sustainable, you know, public transport kit, including ferries, is that if it's cheaper to run electrified stuff, and that in theory should include the ferries that are, you know, your fuel costs are high, whereas electricity is reasonably cheap and ought to be cheaper in Scotland, given you know, there's a decent amount of sustainably generated electricity, and the plan is for it all to be sustainably generated pretty soon. Okay, so lots of discussions about this. The annual deficit between operational costs and income from ferry fares has increased by almost 100% over the last decade. Every pound paid by users, another £2 of public funds are required. So users are only covering a third of the operational cost of the ferries. That's, you might say that's fine if it's achieving, you know, broader aims and requirements, but not clear. But Scotland is still part of the UK. Surely the UK could borrow for Scotland, you'd hope. But it would require the UK government to be interested in improving people's lives, as Michael Sears just perfectly said immediately afterwards. Yeah, correct. Right, so aviation. Air travel is the quickest and often the most convenient way to travel to and from our island communities. And it can also be more environmentally friendly than travelling by ferry and car. There's a big caveat there of depending on technology that remains unproven. For some islands, air travel is the only means of ensuring a single day trip to the mainland, and it can also reduce the overall cost of travel by not requiring overnight stays, as ferry trips often do. Quite a reasonable point to make, frankly. That is fair enough. It opens up onwards connections. Yes, fine. So there's lots of a bit of stuff here about routes and discount schemes and. So in 2021, we commissioned a comparative study of air and ferry services. And this found that for those travelling alone, using the ferry and public transport is slower but cheaper than using ferry and car or air and public transport. For those travelling as a group, using the ferry and a car becomes more competitive. Flying tends to be a more popular choice for longer journeys. Ferry travel is more seasonal than air travel, probably reflecting the choices of tourist visitors for car and ferry travel. Yeah. Scottish Government is committed to working to decarbonise scheduled flights within Scotland by 2040. Hydrogen electric aircraft most likely to be used initially on shorter routes. It's never going to be worked on longer routes. But this opens up the potential for flights to and between islands to become more frequent, lower cost, and to emit far fewer emissions. Yes. Actually, this is where a situation where that is not complete bullshit. For island hoppers and for flights to and from islands, that it's potentially viable. Yeah. Challenging, sure, but potentially viable. So, what else? Fixed links is the fun bit. So, this is a fun bit of outcome that we get to review. So, the Uncritical Sam is pointing out rightly that don't a lot of big city metros have a fare box recovery ratio lower than 33%? Yeah, well, indeed. So maybe this is fine. I think the issue is that it wasn't. It's been better quite recently, and the increased costs are coming not so much from fewer people travelling, but more from just the costs increasing very, very quickly to keep these ferries running. And a lot of that comes from the fact that maintenance costs increase as a vehicle gets older. So there is, to some extent, I can understand them challenging that. Rather than just say, it is reasonable we pay this much. If we've been able to spend less and deliver as good a service, then it's understandable that actually if there's a disproportionate rise in the operational costs, that needs to be considered. Because if that's going to continue, then you would reach, if that's going to continue, if it's another 100% over the next decade, then that starts, that's not sustainable. That you can't sustain that indefinitely. So what's really quite interesting is this bit where we talk about fixed links. Bridges, tunnels, and causeways to islands and roads to peninsulas. Wait a minute, roads. Are already in place in Scotland. They provide a very high level of road transport connectivity. There are also other locations where new fixed links are either proposed or being considered. Yes. So, it considered a large number of proposals. The STPR2, the Strategic Transport Projects Review 2, considered a large number of proposals for new fixed links to communities served by existing ferries, and concluded that replacing ferry services with fixed links can improve reliability, connectivity, capacity, and travel times, and allow for the wider reconfiguration of ferry services. It recommended further work to look at 3 potential links to replace current Clyde-Hebrides ferry services. So, what are those? It's going to be time to have a look at the map. The first, the Sound of Harris, linking the Uists and Harris Lewis. I'll tell you where this is. Let's get it up and have a look. We're going over here. Here is the ferry link. It's a very wibbly-weavy ferry route, and very environmentally, as any of these areas are, they're environmentally sensitive. So it's right to not... it's right to not... just bulldoze a road through all of this, right? It's quite reasonable to not just go, just smash it through here. A couple of reasons for this. Number one, waters are often... You know what? What would be actually good here is a real map. Sort of, forgive me, OpenStreetMap, but actually you're a competitor with Google Maps. You're not a competitor with actual mapping. So let's get some actual mapping going on here. There we go. Frustratingly, we don't have... Sometimes... anyway, there's the ferry going through here. There's the ferry. It connects. It comes out from here. It's a lovely ferry. I've taken it before. Lever is very nice. Of course, one of the wonderful things is... Loch na Cartach. In fact, no. The finest thing is the beach here. This beach is... oh, my goodness me. One of the most spectacular sights in Scotland. It's good. It's very, 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 very nice. Anyway, right, so I digress. So fixed link here. That's the number 1 fixed link. Is I can definitely F11 this thing here. Yeah, that's the number 1 fixed link. Is linking from North Uist across to Harris. It's funny. Harris becomes Lewis kind of without anyone noticing. It's funny, like you go along the main road and you're going along, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, yeah, now you're in Lewis. Yeah. You're like, what? It just kind of happens. It happens like, is it like here? Anyway, it just sort of happens, and then all of a sudden you're in Lewis. Anyway, I digress. So, what is the next ferry that they are going to replace? So the next fixed link, the Sound of Barra, linking Barra and the Uists. This is absolutely another one that I think makes good sense. So let's do that. Let's go down. So that's down. Let's go all the way down here. Here, it's connecting Barra with South Uist, and this road appeared as has a causeway that you take to get to the ferry. How would you actually do those physical fixed connections? You do tunnels. Oh, the other thing I didn't say earlier is tides. Tidal connections are, some of the tidal strength on here is extremely. Some of the tidal flow is extremely powerful, and some of these channels are very deep. Scottish Coast Marine map. I need to find this marine map. How did I find? There's a website that had wonderful online mapping, and I stupidly have no idea where I've put it. Maps.marine.gov.scot. Let's see if this takes us where we need to be. Let's have a look. Let's find out, shall we? Let's see. Maybe it'll never load, and we'll never know. Let's just leave that stewing. So, connection. I believe this is fairly deep. You have to get your ferry across here. So, bridging through this. Also, some very beautiful beaches. Of course, the famous airfield on Barra Beach here. making these connections and avoiding, joining the dots between you potentially a road link, you might join the dots, but that involves a lot of destruction. So very sensitive and beautiful islands. So not ideal. These are challenging situations, very much challenging. People are saying just do it at the is it at the isthmus? Morwen is asking. Yeah, I think it is, but you don't notice much when you're cycling through. I have to say, people want me to bring up the bathymetric map of Scotland. That's what I'm trying to find. Yeah. Bathymetric map, Scotland. Let's see. But no, that's all the loch. Zoomable map of Scotland. Let's see. The trouble is this is one from. These are just the lochs, so that's not hugely useful. Funnily enough, I think these are the ones that have been used they're still used in the current OS maps actually. Bathymetry marine.gov. Yeah. Okay. No. I don't think we're going to find it easily. I've lost. There's a beautiful map source that I cannot find for the life of me, which is very frustrating. So that's number 2. But what is number 3? This one's the more interesting one. Mull, connecting Mull and the Scottish mainland. I have absolutely no idea how you achieve this because the channels. So let's go. Let's show you what is Mull. Mull is this. Mull. You've got Ballymore in the top. You've got Craignier, which is the main port in the east. You've got Iona here in the west, linked by Wee Ferry, and then Staffa's like way out here. There's Staffa. There's Fingal's Cave on the other side. Anyway, so Staffa's the island with all the hexagons. By the way, it's the same as Giant's Causeway over in Ireland. On the north of Ireland, same thing. So, there is Mull. Hello, Mull. It's a wonderful, fun island, lovely to cycle around. Highly recommend doing that, in fact. It's a gorgeous place to cycle about. Coming down off the hill into Tobermory is a delight as well on your bike. Particularly if you then go across, get the ferry across to Lochaline and then cycle... to Kilcohen, forgive me, and then cycle along Glenborradale, the Glenborradale Road along Loch Sunart. It is just spectacularly beautiful. Ending up in Strontian, it's just a spectacularly beautiful cycle. As all the cycles around here are just wonderful. It's a little busier now than it used to be when I was cycling more regularly, but more cars and tourists, but it's still very gorgeous. So Mull. How do you get Mull to the mainland? Well, a lot of the discussions are about basically replacing the Fishnish to Lochaline ferry as it's one of the kind of the shortest distances. It's very deep, though. This is an extremely deep channel here, actually. So doing that would be not the easiest. So I'd be interested to know what any potential proposal would be. Go up to Tobermory, and I don't think you can do it. Go down this way, and the channels are too far. I think you'd struggle to set again. You'd just struggle to manage it. The other challenge, though, is if you do focus on the Fishnish Lochaline connection, then you end up on a very long, in most places, single carriageway road that gets you to not many useful places. In fact, it gets you up to the other end of it gets you to Strontian, and then you've got a you've got you've got the road to and then you've got to rely on the Corran ferry. So you're still relying on a ferry at that point anyway, basically to get across. It's you say bridgeable distance. No is the answer because it's deep. It's very deep. Actually, Google Maps might actually do the answer here. Let me go here. Let's not dox anyone here. So I need to always remind myself to never open Google Maps this way, but that's fine. Hello, mouse. Of course, my mouse runs out of batteries just at this point. The thing is, I have the technology to make that not a problem. Here we go. So, there we go. He says not having the USB port plugged in. I do have the technology. There we go. So, the thing is, if we go down to there's Mull. It's real deep here. Also, just to give you an idea of scale, let me just give you some scale. Let me just get a distance here. Let's get a measure distance from here to here is about 3 kilometers, so 2 miles. 1.5 miles. No, that's a huge distance. with a very deep and challenging and extremely powerful tidal flow channel. No, that's a very challenging bit of civil engineering to do. No, that's not a particularly bridgeable distance. I mean, you could, but the scale of structure you're talking about is enormous. No, if you're doing that, I would probably expect that it would be a tunnel of some kind. But even so, it'd be it's no matter how you skin this cat challenging, and then it doesn't fix the fact that you've then got a single carriageway main road to then link through to. So at that point, it's like, well, okay, if you're doing that, then maybe you're going across to Carrera. But again, that's a huge distance, and there's I'm interested to know what they come up with on that one, frankly, because wowza. Yeah, exactly, Michael C. Yeah, getting that bridge, building a bridge of that span, you can't do it as a nice long causeway like some bridges might be, because you've got to get over the existing ferries that are going out to the Outer Hebrides, and you've also got to deal with extreme depth. Like, this is a very, very, very deep. No little spindly pier is going to get the depth down there. You have to span it. On the bathymetric map I sent a link for above. Your links won't have worked, Les Chegwin. Let's see. Link for the above that ferry goes across the deepest part of the channel. There, shallow bits further along the coast. Yeah, Les. Yeah, write it out as a something dot something, and then someone else one of the spanners will be able to make it work. So. Thanks for sending that through, though. It will get through eventually if you kind of half write it out. Someone else will make it work. So yeah, big distances. So that one's interesting. I'm interested by that, and so too are the locals, because island communities have expressed mixed views about the potential fixed links noted in that report, with some concerned about a loss of island identity, increased road traffic and subsequent environmental impact, and a reduction in local services due to the connection being both on and off the island. We will now undertake a more... So they're saying, fine, due consideration be given to bridges, tunnels, causeways before selecting the most suitable option in each of these routes. So they really are keen to press ahead on it. The focus will be on providing a resilient connection for our island communities who wish to be connected. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that's an interesting one, really. I realize we're not ended up getting much through this, but I think that's the most interesting bit, really. Raf H is saying, surely there isn't a treasury boffin that would approve a structure of that size, or is the ferry so expensive the fixed capital is worth it? Well, mixture, I believe. And they're talking then about onward and connecting travel, such as train and bus. For the most part, it's bus, but part of the reason I had this map up is a bit of a reminder that in several locations it isn't just bus, because Oban has a rail connection, and a decent one at that. Malig has a decent series of ferry connections. Malig pretty busy. The connection across the sky is a fixed link now, so that's kind of less relevant. The Kalsh link is less key, but the Oban is the main harbour that connects to most of these places, actually, and its connection to is decent, and I think you could improve that link. You could improve the connection up to Oban further, actually, quite reasonably, because that ferry connection is really, really very, very valuable, and the fact that it's rail connected is great. I think there's quite a bit you could do to tidy up the electrification would be a good start, because you could then... The advantage of electrification on this line is less for the reasons that you electrify busy routes. It's more for the fact that with electrification, you can cut some of the corners out, because one of the reasons that cutting corners out on a line like this is difficult is because every corner you cut means a steeper railway on railway lines that are often already at the limits of gradient for a kind of diesel multiple units. So one of the things that you can achieve by electrifying a railway is that you can cut corners, because an electric train does up and downhill better than a diesel one. So that's one reason why electrification might help to get you better services up to Oban. But certainly looking at ways to improve the connection up to Oban by rail, how do you do journey? Looking at journey time improvement assessment to bring Oban close to Glasgow would be an absolutely valid thing to consider and explore. I think I reckon there's a lot that you could do in terms of journey time improvements, to get Oban better linked to Glasgow. The other thing, of course, is connectivity from the Isles across to the East Coast. And at the moment, you have to go via Glasgow because we ripped up the line that directly connects Oban and Edinburgh via Stirling. So that's something else that, if you want to improve access to the west coast of Scotland, then that's possibly one of the ways you might think about doing it, Another connection that never existed in totality, although there was a reasonably overbuilt line that got you as far as Fort Augustus here, is actually getting Inverness connected across to the Isles, because that's an incredibly popular tourist route. And providing a rail connection there is actually important for the rest of the Scottish rail network, because you would enable a huge amount of traffic on the Loch Ness Road to be diverted onto rail. And the connections for the Isles from Inverness would also be greatly improved by that connection. Wouldn't it be even more marvellous if you connected the Oban to Fort William to Inverness? That corridor could be extremely valuable, but that's just talking about some pretty heavy civil engineering at that point. Whilst I think Inverness Fort William has some validity because of how busy it is, Fort William Oban, very busy corridor. It'd be very, very useful to connect them by rail directly. There'd be some engineering involved though. Aspirational interest, but I think if you're going to talk about priorities, let's talk about next episode. Let's talk about that next episode, shall we? That's my hint. So, given there's a lot more pages to go, I'm going to kind of jump through a lot of this. So, there's quite a bit of stuff about challenges and opportunities. So there's stuff here going on about some new routes that were introduced, service frequencies that were improved, some reductions in fares, the fact that more people travelling, but then the challenges have arisen, which is much higher operating costs. Is even though there's been an increase in fare box revenue, the operating costs have increased dramatically. More people taking their cars on ferries has been a challenge as well. So there's a tremendous rise in the number of cars being taken. So that's something that needs to be engaged with. Shortages of vehicle space on key routes, meaning people cannot travel by ferry with a car at short notice, which is a real challenge. A lack of spare vessels to cover for breakdowns is a challenge, and an increase in cancellations and delays on the Clyde Hebrides ferries network. And this has been linked to worsening weather and an overstretched fleet, so kind of a combination there. So key series of challenges. The graph there's stuff about community voice and transparency here that I'm not skipping it because it's not important, but because I want to focus. I want to talk about the reliability and resilience picture. So here is the last decade-ish, and you have the contract reliability in a very close colour to the actual reliability, but the top line there is the contracted reliability. You can see that the requirements have been reduced over the years over the decades. It's like, oh yeah, your contractual requirement can reduce. I assume that's partly from bad weather days, where the contract says if the weather's particularly bad, you aren't contracted to have to run on those days, so that it accounts for that. A recent Met Office report quoted in Parliament's Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee provide evidence on whether the climate of Scotland had been getting stormier, and noted that a perception that it has become stormier in recent years is a valid belief. A perception that it has become stormier in recent years, 2011 to 2020, is a valid belief, and the period 1981 to 2020 is stormier than the mid-20th century. There you go. So there you go. Just justifies the fact that it is true that it's getting stormier. It is true that there are challenges. So then that's on the Clyde Hebrides network. Then have a look on the Northern Isles, so Orkney, Shetland. You can see similar picture here that the actual reliability is quite sizably below, and actually, reliability on the Clyde Hebrides ferries has really dropped down, dropping down towards 90%, it's 90 towards 93% versus a contracted requirement of 98, above 98%. So it's a lot of services over a year. That's quite a number of services being dropped out and impacting on people. And then accessibility is obviously key. I'm actually not going to dwell on that point, even though it's something, obviously, as you all know, I care deeply about. There are challenges of accessibility on the ferries, though. This has been picked up a lot by people on Twitter recently, with some discussion about some of the new ferries, so that's imperfect actually on some of the new ferry fronts, and it's frustrating that that's not been facilitated fully on the new ferries. So there's discussion here about integrating services, which lots of talk, nothing solid about what they're going to do. Stuff about capacity and demand, so we talked about that being a challenge. And then also there's I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to press this one too much further. Freight, it's interesting here seeing, key role of the ferries is to move goods and services, usually carried by HGVs on the ferries. So there are some freight-only vessels because of the high amount of... There are freight-only vessels, 2 of them, between Shetland and Orkney and Aberdeen, because of the high volume of freight travelling to and from the Northern Isles. There is an overnight sailing for freight using the regular passenger vehicle between Stornoway and Ullapool, which makes sense because there's a lot of freight comes through that corridor. As you'll see when the night ferry, if you're there late in the evening and the night ferry pulls in, you see all the vehicles pulling off. It's quite interesting. And some chartered vessels are used for delivering bulk or specialist cargoes. So the distilleries arrange for delivery of grain by bulk freighter, which is very interesting, on Islay. And there's some freight being moved by air. And there's some other bollocks about drones, but I won't worry too much about that. So that's interesting looking at that. And then they're talking about some of the vessels and ports. So they've ordered 6 new major vessels for Calmac, introducing a second summer vessel to the Little Minch routes. Okay, port upgrades at Tarbert, Lochmadin, Uig. Fine, okay, and also monitoring the effects of climate change on rising sea levels to inform the design or improvements to port infrastructure. Absolutely, another factor that has to be thought about. Sorry, I'm getting myself a bit... I'm going down with something by the seams of it. Michael C. is saying... Oh, there's some chat going on here. Master Trams is saying, when they were building the Sky Fixed Link, did they ever consider extending the railway as well? No. Not that time. It was also kind of like... it was early PFI, so no interest in the railways at that point. Michael C. It seems more likely to me that Oban and Fort William would be connected by an express ferry. Possibly, but yeah. The point is about the onward connectivity, though, isn't it? And the speed as well. Ferries aren't that quick, whereas trains are quicker and also more resilient in bad weather than ferries, in theory. And then fares, I'm not too worried about. So, and there's a little bit about local authority ferry services. It's funny that all that gets talked about, but a fixed link at Corran isn't talked about, which is interesting. I suppose that. Let's Google this. Fixed link Corran ferry, because I'm pretty sure it gets discussed quite regularly. But there was a fixed link study that said the costs were too high, basically, and interesting. There is a study here, so let's just let's open it. Let's have a look. Let's have a quick look, shall we? It's June 2024. This is quite recent. Interesting. Okay. The review could have concerns regarding timescales for delivery. Rising costs in the construction industry. The current estimated cost for a suitable bridge solution, similar to Skybridge, including contingency and approach works, were expected to be in the region of 90 million to 120 million. From feasibility, where we are now, to open to traffic, would be in the region of 10 years. Consideration also needs to be given to the consequential pressure that a bridge would bring on existing road infrastructure and single-track roads on the peninsulas. Okay, fine. Unfortunately, a fixed-link solution at Corran was not considered as a project to take forward in the STPR2, which has restricted its appraisal proposals to only Scottish government-owned assets. There we go. So you're not allowed to... basically, that killed it. The fact that it wasn't included as infrastructure, which is funny because I think it is maybe a connection that makes much more sense. But anyway, there we go. It's still a decent distance across the water there. Again, very strong tidal flows. Anyway, there we go. So let's have a look. So this report's fun stuff. It's an example of some of the things they look at and think about and talk about. Yeah, there you go. So they're kind of describing a sort of there's a tunnel option. Interesting. How that actually ends up working. Oof. Yeah, no, I don't think that's the right option. Interesting. It's a bridge. There's some places where you could put the bridge, where the ferry is currently at its shortest location, and Further to the north, fine. Some ideas of what a bridge alignment might end up looking like. And you do a loopy loop round and then go across the thing. You've got there's the bridge where the bridge should be. Lovely. And bridge. Truss bridge, that's hilarious, but doable. Yeah, they're showing what the Valhoulish bridge, Olivide in Spain, which is quite the structure, and then they're randomly picking the Connell Bridge, which is a railway bridge, of course, as we all know. So they're describing what spans they'd be achieving on the bridge, and they're showing the Sky Bridge there. That's a very cool bridge, in fairness, very straightforward design, and all this stuff here, and showing what they could. The cable stayed is hilariously massive. Like putting that in would be quite something. Good grief. Yeah. Whew. Anyway. The lifting bridge, baffling. So they're looking at all the different. There's this Stantec earning their meat by just copy pasting a load of guff about bridges. That's very nice for everyone, but I mean, yeah, whatever. Timetables, fine, okay. So there we go. There we go. Fixed link outline feasibility study. So it's a bit. This is just the fancy thing showing what the thing looks like and the different options, and what the bridge might look like. The idea of putting that cable stay bridge in there, well, I mean, I suppose it could work. I mean, the advantage of that is you've got less stuff to dig into the ground, so there's a benefit to doing it that way. But that's what it would look like for anyone who knows that area. Interesting. Okay. It's a bit of a messed up. Formatting's gone to absolute hell on this, whatever they've done. Nice work. Anyway, right, enough of that. Let's focus on let's finish off the our island's connectivity plan and reach the end of that. So, next steps. Well, the next steps are basically do everything we said, and we've talked about it, and happy days. So, yeah. I don't remember subscribing to you, but this seems interesting, so I'll say, hello, Testing Oscar. Nice to see you. You're on live. It's all happening. Anything like the 7-mile underwater tunnel for 110 million in the Faroes could never happen in the UK state of planning and not crazy. Yeah, it's because we just don't build anything like this. That's the challenge, you know. When was the last time we built anything like that in Scotland? You know, we built the Queensferry Crossing, which was enormous, and in actuality quite well delivered, actually. We delivered the Sky Bridge that was PPP. What other sort of bridges of that scale have we delivered since? Like, very few. Like, we just don't build this stuff. That's part of the problem. Oh, the Kincardine Bridge, it's not the Kincardine Bridge, it's the CAX. What's it actually called? It's called I wrote a bloody report about it when I was at uni, and I've just forgotten the name of the one next to it. It's called the there it is. It's the Clackmannanshire Bridge, of course. It is the Clackmannanshire Bridge. Thank you, Anne Person. You know exactly the one I was referring to. That was a bridge, but we haven't built many new bridges really over all that time. The Inverness one was much earlier. The Keswick Bridge was built back in the 80s. And what's hilarious is that Inverness has a little crest that includes that bridge, except that it doesn't include that bridge because the bridge they put on the crest is a suspension bridge. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Is there a sketch maybe of the older suspension bridge in the centre of Inverness? Because maybe it is, and that's okay. Anyway, because there is a small old suspension bridge within, in the centre of Inverness, which is quite nice, actually, just south of the town centre. So that's all of that stuff. It's feeding into things like the National Transport Strategy and STPR2, which, as I say, is an imperfect document, I think. But it's something. It's better to have one. At least they have one. England doesn't have one. So that's the document. What do I think of the document? Is the thing. Well, I don't think it's this document particularly. I think is fine. Wait a minute. I'm just copying and pasting a thing into a place. Home, send to back. There we go. And it's all worth it. I promise you. For whatever nonsense I'm up to, it's all good and worth it. There we are. And there we go. Sorry. Am I formatting this on the go? Yes, because I just had a very serious and complex and detailed conversation with my wife about some things before the episode, which is why I changed this from being a news episode to this, because things are always afoot. And we need to chat about some important stuff. So what do I think about what am I thinking about the Islands Connectivity Plan? Well, to be honest, it doesn't say much, so I don't think I can say much that's bad about it. I'm thinking 4 Pandrel clips. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, Kurt. You're spot on. That's right. It's got 4 Pandrel clips. That's where I think it sits, because it's fine. Like, okay, I think there are some things in there that are a bit silly, like mentioning mass, and perhaps not being quite as prescriptive, perhaps not being quite as specific as I would like about certain things. Yeah, no existing analysis of commercial, local, public, tourist mix of existing services. How does the mix change going forwards? Yeah, they're not hugely assertive about what needs to be, what do we want. There's nothing about capacities and maybe how to actually make specific analysis of what those links should look like. So yeah, but I think there's only so much of that you can actually do. Like sticking with what you've got and working out how to deliver that better is not necessarily a bad way to do things on this scale. So I go with four Pandrel clips, I think, on that one. Yeah. Any thoughts? What people thinking about this? This is a bit of a random episode, perhaps, but it's a chance for us to talk about something a bit different. We don't often talk about Island Connect. I think the last time we were talking about this sort of thing was when we were talking about how to connect England or Scotland over to Ireland. I think it was and Wales over to Ireland. I think it was the last time we were talking about similar themes of engineering. I don't know. An interesting one. I find that quite interesting to sort of see those challenges. It's quite interesting looking at those challenges from the surveys of islanders and what things are key. I think their key priorities kind of make sense based on they feel reflective of islanders' needs, which is quite good. It might be different. It feels like a different set of priorities, perhaps, to those that you might see in a city, in terms of the order of requirement. But reliability and reliability being key is really, and resilience is makes sense. And I dare say probably is very high on the priority list for kind of rail transport as well. So much to share in terms of knowledge on there. So the usual outie plugs, I think. To audio only people, yes, I'm a week late on episodes already. Chuck your questions over because I'll answer them at the end. The usual audio only plugs. Thanks for listening, and this will be up as will last week's soon. Patreon.com/GarethDennis for supporting me to keep doing this. The job situation is still evolving. I'm not going to tell you that I've definitely got a job until I've signed on the dotted line. Let's just put it that way. GarethDennis.co.uk/merch for merchandise. Loose change and abuse can be fired at me via paypal.me/GarethDennis and GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for the chat to continue ad infinitum. Hello, everyone in the Discord server who are also here in the chat. Lovely to see you all. The book, to those almost everyone here has probably bought a copy, and to those of you who have, I thank you greatly. The tour planning continues, so more on that in a bit. W2IP, still a co-host as of this moment. I'll be recording another one tonight, I think, which will be fun. That once job dead, that end probably. We'll see what the crew say. And the mapping. I'm continuing with the mapping. This for Avatros. It continues. We just had an OS map up, and now you can see what one of those might look like for the immensely complicated world of Avatros. Yes, so that's more of that also in the future. Let's see. More to think about in the future if depending on what all happens with things. Anyway, next week, episode 248. What should the Scottish Railway map look like? Brackets 2. Because I did a bit of a cop-out. Well, I didn't do a cop-out in the last one. It's just we spent a lot of time building the network. We didn't actually say, well, what are the kind of the list of interventions? What are the gaps? What are the things that our analysis said that the Scottish Rail map is lacking? And I'm not going to focus on the cities because there's a lot to be said about the city networks. But I'm going to look at the big picture stuff of what are the big gaps? What are the big obvious missing links in the Scottish Rail network? What are the projects that we need to be seeing? So that's going to be a fun one. So we're going to actually look at the Scottish Railway map and what needs to be happening. What are the projects that need to be happening? What might those railway lines look like? As well. So that should be interesting. Episode 248. We might even see if I can do a bit of alignment work and actually pitch up what those railways might actually look like as completed entities rather than me kind of broadly sketching out roughly where those lines might be. So that should be interesting. I'm gonna usually those railway map episodes are pretty popular. So there will be mapping, there'll be CAD, there'll be all sorts of good fun. And we'll kind of build on a little bit of what we talked about in this episode and maybe have a little bit of a think about fixed links, perhaps even. Some fun stuff to think about. Yes, so that is next week. So there were a couple of little queries. So Kerr is asking opinions on Transport Scotland versus DFT. Transport Scotland is okay, but they're not as great as a lot of people in England think they are. People in Scotland are better familiar with the fact they're pretty roads focused. A9 dualling being their key example of problems. They're not very aspirational with what rail can achieve. They're not fighting particularly hard for capital expenditure and really driving for a transformational change. And the key problem is that they're not interested in opening. There are gaps in the rail network that we're going to talk about next week that Transport Scotland have a strong lack of interest in delivering. So yeah, they're not pushing the boat out, not pushing things forward, and their oversight on the ferries not great. So yeah, not imperfect, but better than the DFT as a transport controlling entity. But I think TFW probably ahead of both, if not, certainly also an imperfect organisation. But I would say TFW are actually further ahead, despite having less power than Transport Scotland does, with Transport being almost fully devolved in Scotland, not entirely, but almost fully devolved. Whereas in Wales, lots of particularly rail powers are very much held by Westminster still. So, yeah, I'm interested to pick that one up. Actually, I'll have to rewatch my old original episode, which was episode 50 or something. I was doing something with it earlier. I'll remind us next week. I'll remind us which episode we did the first one on. But yeah, go back and find that. Look, what should the Scottish Railway map look like? Not episode 2 was like the best part of 200 episodes ago, I think. So refresh your memory. Go and have a look at that one and pick up the mapping and see what gives. Short of that, I think there's not much more from me to really say. I think that's that's probably everything, I think, for tonight. I've ended up dragging it out a little bit. Here we go. Mr. Guy Snails. Here's an interesting question. Yeah, Mr. Guy Snails. This is one of those episodes where roads play a bigger part. Would you ever do an episode on road projects that are good? Intermodal, level crossing, suppression. Very interesting question. And yeah, I suppose within what I've looked at, when we talk about road infrastructure in the Isles, buses have to play a major part in how that infrastructure is being used. But rail is not always the right, perfect, wonderful solution. In terms of what how you would decide what rail is best when you've got reasonably high density flows or speed as a factor. If you had a situation where you, for example, set a target of wanting timings from the Hebrides to Glasgow or Edinburgh of via public transport and not flying of a set time, and that required, say, a rail link to Ullapool, then that's the sort of thing where that's what might and that sort of thing required to get those journey times, you'd struggle to have it reliably with some of the traffic you get on the Ullapool road. So you might say, well, actually, to get those reliable speeds, you need to have a rail link to Ullapool to get the speed, and that might drive needing to expand the network. But otherwise, the justification for rail, it's not necessarily the best use of rail infrastructure out on the edges of the rural parts of the country like that, given how low the population densities are. Buses, high quality and frequent buses, however, make use of that existing infrastructure corridor, because the last thing you want to do is, from a carbon perspective, you don't want to duplicate linear infrastructure corridors if it's not the best use of that infrastructure. So road with bus usage, absolutely useful, yeah, for sure. The main road projects that I advocate for, of course, though, is prioritising buses, so infrastructure being repurposed for buses, total pedestrianisation, so removing vehicles from roads, because roads are still roads even if they haven't got cars on them, and also likewise building, repurposing and indeed building new cycle infrastructure. Those are also kind of roads. That's the highways engineers are the ones designing those things. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for road infrastructure. It's just not car infrastructure that I think we need to be worrying too much about at the moment. Anyway, right, I think that's quite enough for me waffling on. It's been a bit of a here and there episode actually, but an interesting one, I think. Hopefully interesting for you. Anyway, I'm going to wave vigorously and say, everyone, cheerio!